What do you want in life, and is it really worth getting? How would you respond to such a question? It is a serious question that can determine what life is going to be for us. For many people, the usual answer would include go for something that excites you the most, they say, or seek something that would bring you joy and make you feel good, or look for more successes, more power, more money, or perhaps ask for self-confidence, improve your attractiveness, gain a sense of value and importance. For some, it's a life of adventure and exploration. There are people who would say that what they want in life is to make a difference in others, to be recognized for the good that they do. Or for some, it's as simple as perhaps staying married to the same person, having kids, or having grandkids. Or some would say what they want in life is to simply grow old without losing their mind or control over their body. For many, it's as simple as wishing to have plenty of energy and time to enjoy each day. Trying to find out what you really want in life is a serious task. But that particular task is going to determine what you think of yourself and how different your life is going to be. Now, what you regard as important in your life will define how you live each day, and it will give you the reason for living it. What do you really want in life, and is it worth getting it? In our scripture this morning, we will find the people of God, the nation of Israel, faced with similar questions. Moses, their leader, has gone up into the mountain, talking to God and receiving all these instructions from God. And they have become impatient of his absence. They're sort of ready to go on with it and go ahead without Moses. So because of the prolonged absence of Moses, they started to turn to their own sense of frustrations and demands. Verse 1 of Exodus chapter 32 tells us that when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." What we will see in this particular story is really how easy it is for us to turn to idolatry. How easy it is for us to actually turn our back on God and seek something else. In fact, what it would make us realize is that the things that we deem to be important, or the kinds of things that we seek in life, are really evidence of what we regard to be important in our life. In the case of these people who have become impatient because of the absence of Moses, they would turn to something that they have been very familiar with for the last 430 years. They would revert to the gods that they know. They would turn their attention to the ones that they were used to, the very ones from whom God said they should turn away from. 430 years of slavery in Egypt. Then God raised a man named Moses. He spoke to him through a burning bush and told him that I am who I am Yahweh, and I have commissioned you to lead this people out of Egypt. We know that it took a while for Moses to negotiate with the Pharaoh and eventually demonstrated the power of God the power of the one who has called him, who has commissioned him to lead his people out of Egypt. Eventually, the Pharaoh gave in after a series of plagues that hit Egypt. And we all know that when they were escaping, they were faced with an obstacle, the big Red Sea in front of them. And again, God demonstrated His power through Moses and parted that great sea so that they can pass through. And now they are in the area what we call the Sinai Peninsula or the Sinai Wilderness. They've been going around for several months now. And they've encountered the difficulty of living in the desert. They're out of the comfort of the advanced city or the advanced towns of Egypt. They no longer have a granary where they could go and get some grain. They don't have the spices and the meat that they used to enjoy in Egypt. Yes, they are free, but they are roaming around the wilderness. God provided water for them. God provided manna for them. But I'm sure at this point many are already starting to reminisce the good things that they are missing from Egypt. Chapter 24 tells us that God called on Moses to go up the mountain, Mount Sinai. This is where God would visibly appear through fire and clouds. He would descend on that particular mountain, and He called on Moses to meet up with Him. And we know that from chapter 24 leading up to chapter 31, there's several instructions that God would give to Moses, a series of them. But at the end of chapter 24, we are told that Moses would stay in that mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So probably this is not the 40th day yet, but it's more than a month now. And the people are wondering what has happened to Moses. It's very easy to get impatient with the things that God is doing in our life. The kinds of things that He's working to accomplish in our life. Many of that would usually take a lot of time. And this is very human of us, to be impatient. We set a goal, we set an objective, and we sort of estimate what it would cost us. And then after a while, we realize that it's going to cost us more. So we try to revise the means of accomplishing that goal. You know how frightening it was. If you look at the previous chapters, it says that when God descended on the mountain, there was thunder, and there was lightning, and there was dark clouds covering the mountain. It's a scary scene. And imagine Moses walking up into the top of the mountain and disappearing into the dark clouds. And it's been more than a month. Whatever happened to Moses? Now we don't have a visible representation of God among us. There's no one here who could say that he's speaking for God, that he is acting on behalf of God. How are we supposed to experience the miracles that Moses did if he's not here anymore? We're all going to end up dying in this desert. I don't know what the rumor was in the camp during that day, but I'm sure it has something to do with the sense of, that sense of restlessness. That whatever it is that they have planned to accomplish or the goals that they have set, the things that Moses promised to them are now at jeopardy. How are things going to turn out from now on that Moses is gone? When they saw that Moses was so long in coming down, he's not coming. They gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. That's kind of mean, don't you think? This guy who led us out of Egypt, we could care less about his whereabouts. We don't know. He's gone. Last time we checked, He's not here anymore. He went up the mountain, poof! We don't know where he went. So Aaron, we must do something. Aaron, who is the sidekick of Moses at this point, the second in command, Aaron, this calls for an action. We need somebody to take us from here. We can just be stuck in the wilderness, Aaron. Do something about it. Moses is gone. There's got to be an alternative or a replacement for Moses. Come, make us gods who will go before us. As much as we love the democratic process and democracy itself, but this is a bad example of democracy. The voice of the people here is not exactly the voice of God, as you can see. We want gods who will go before us. But didn't just they hear of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20? Didn't Moses tell them about commandment number 1, that you shall have no other gods before me? Didn't they hear about commandment number 2, that you shall not make any kind of graven images to represent God and worship before those images? Didn't they understand those 2 commandments? And yet they said, come, make us gods. Of course, the plain reading of this would sound like they have suddenly turned off their theological minds and forgot about Yahweh. It would appear like they have immediately replaced Yahweh in their mind, that there is no more Yahweh or something like that. Probably a better understanding is to see this as them asking for a visible representation of Yahweh, instead of outrightly saying that we do not think that Yahweh exists anymore, but they're saying that although Yahweh may still exist, we want somebody right here before us who would stand for him. Because this is how the gods functioned in Egypt. The animals, they represent a reality more than the bull itself or the oxen. The statues, the snakes, and the different kinds of things that they bow down to, they're not sort of gods in themselves, but they represent a reality beyond that. So it must have been this kind of thinking that is being reflected in this demand to make us gods. They're not saying, we need somebody, we don't know if Yahweh still exists. What they're saying is we need a representation of Yahweh in our midst in the same way that Moses was standing for God. We want gods. Aaron, do something about it. The figure of a bull or a calf at that is very popular in the southern part of Egypt during this time, the area where the Jews were, in fact, slaves, or where they settled in. They are familiar with the god Apis, the bull god who is powerful, who is in charge of nature, who could provide great harvest, who could give them strength, who could sustain them through their journey. So it's only natural that they would fall back to a god that they are very familiar with. But something even worse happened here. They're not only going to say that we need a representation of Yahweh, but now they're actually saying that this particular thing is responsible for bringing them to where they are at now. Come, make us gods who will lead us, who will go before us. Because they know the journey is not over yet. They're in a sort of a, what do you call that? They're in transit. They're in the wilderness, but they're supposed to go to promised land, and they need the company, the presence of God. And in this case, they want it in the form of an idol. Now, of course, Aaron here, being the associate pastor of Moses, would act in a manner that is appalling also. Verse 2, he says, Aaron answered, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your children are wearing, and bring them to me. They have personal jewelries when they left Egypt. So verse 3, so all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made him into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. So all these precious metals were gathered in, melted obviously, and then placed into a cast. And out of that, this image of a bull. We're not told exactly how big, how large this thing is. Large enough for people to appreciate. And then it was shaped, fashioned using a tool. Again, emphasizing the fact that this is a god of their own doing. This did not magically appear out of the fire, although that's how Aaron is going to report the whole incident. He's going to say, we were just putting all these jewelries, and then out of the fire, here's this golden calf. Magic, voila! No, it says here it was fashioned by a tool. It was deliberate. It was truly a craftsmanship in itself. Now, idolatry is not just, participating in religious festivities. Idolatry is not just having religious figurines or graven images in our car or in our homes. Idolatry is not simply, offering prayers to some wooden or stone statue at that. That's not just idolatry. It's a lot more. In fact, it's very easy to be caught in the dangers of idolatry. In fact, I would say that all of us, at one point or another, have become guilty of idolatrous practices. We know that in the New Testament, idolatry is more than just overt act of worshiping statues, more than just the external idolatrous practice that we see people do nowadays. But we should start thinking of those external practices as symptomatic of an internal spiritual problem. The Bible defines idolatry in a much broader sense, not just the obvious acts that violates commandment number 1 and commandment number 2. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, he writes, "For of this you can be sure," he says, "no immoral, impure, or greedy person." And then there's a comment to it. It says, "Such a person," a qualifier, "is an idolater." Greediness, or a greedy person, is an idolater. And Paul says it has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, he writes, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed," which is idolatry. So in this two of this, what we call vice list or sin list, Paul always identifies greed, covetousness, as something idolatrous. Now, I think that's insightful. Because if you remember our original question, what do we really want in life? And I think that's key to diagnosing if we are indeed idolatrous internally. What do we want in life? What do we seek for? Don't they say that it is the one thing that keeps us alive? It is the desiring that drives our life. So it's no accident that Paul would refer to greed and the desire for more, the incessant desire, the unsatisfied longing for something else other than God. That in itself is idolatry. It is the excessive love and devotion to material things. Greed is a desire to acquire and to keep for ourselves more and more. Now you can excuse yourself and say, "I'm not really a greedy person, I'm more of a generous person." Perhaps that's the case. But what are you truly desiring in life? If you love something more than God, if you are devoted to someone or something other than God, if you are placing your confidence on something other than God, if you are trusting someone or something more with your life than God, if your life is driven by desires other than the glory of God, if your full love and devotion, confidence and trust, service and obedience are directed towards something other than God or in addition to God, I'm sorry to tell you, you are guilty of idolatry. Idolatry is a rejection of God's exclusive right to our love and trust. We want this God, they said. We want gods. And then Aaron complied, created this golden calf. And then after all that is done, and this calf is placed on its pedestal, listen to what Aaron would say. These are your gods. So Aaron said, this is Apis, in this case, he's representing God. These are your gods. Remember the one who took you out, who brought you up out of Egypt. Verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. And he uses, if you notice it's all capitalized, he uses the name Yahweh. So he's still making people believe, or the people are believing at this point, that they're still worshiping Yahweh. But it's just that they're using a different representation of Yahweh because Moses is no longer with them. So the next day, people rose and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterwards, they sat down and drank and got up to indulge in revelry. Now, what is described here is typical of pagan celebration or religious celebrations. They're employing what they already know in terms of how to put all this together as a form of worship to this God. But I would like to really focus more on how dangerous idolatry can be, that it would merit the wrath of God. In saying that, I'm acknowledging that we all have the propensity for other gods. We have the worrying tendency to go for something other than God. Especially when we become impatient with God. Especially when we become discontented with how God is working. Perhaps the speed and the manner that He's trying to accomplish things in our life. Perhaps when it comes to unanswered prayers, when it comes to delayed answers, for example, or those instances when God demands that we wait longer than we are actually willing to. Many of us are simply tempted to say, I'm done with this, God. I've prayed for this person long enough. God, I've suffered for too long. You haven't really responded to all these pleas and cries that you heard me make. And we turn ourselves to something else. Now, maybe in your case, your story is different. Yours is probably more of a story of success. And all this time, you're enjoying life and you're thinking, I got everything that I need. Everything that I place my hand on is successful. Everything that I desire, I have already achieved. And God, it's good to have Him on the side, but I can do without Him. Then you yourself have already turned to something else. Where God should have been, something else has already taken that position. It's a spiritual problem. It's the turning of the heart towards something else other than God. It's the shift in our allegiance, the shift in our devotion. So when we reject God in our life, when we de-God, if there is such a term, if we don't allow God to be God in our own life, we have in effect replaced Him. We have in effect allowed something else or someone else to take over His role in our life. What do you really want in life? Your answer to that question would reveal what you truly or who you truly worship and adore in your life.